Yeah, happy Father's Day to all you dads out here. I was telling somebody before the service, Mother's Day, moms like to gather their people and come to church, and dads on Father's Day, they kind of like to just sleep in and do the thing. So good for you for being here today. I was thinking about my own boys when they were young, and it seemed like pretty much anything when they were little got turned into an epic battle of some form or another. It didn't matter whether it was swords or lightsabers or Pokemon cards or Bionicles, whatever. Anything could be turned into a competition and a challenge. And I remember they used to have this thing that they would say all the time, that they would say, let's verse each other. Let's verse, I'll verse you. I'm going, that's not a thing. That's not English. And then I found, and I don't know if you've heard kids say that. Like, I found out all the kids were saying something similar to that, and I go, well, that kind of makes sense when you think of like being a kid and what you're hearing, because you're hearing Batman versus Superman or whatever, but you're not hearing it versus with a U in it. You're hearing Batman versus Superman. And so it's like something he does, it's a challenge, it's a battle, and so then that becomes, I will verse you, And that used to kind of like just, I'd go, that's not a thing, but actually now it is a thing, and it's actually in the dictionary, in slang, as like, so it's official. So I'm not fighting it, so Boaz is going to verse this other Redeemer today. And, I feel like kids always like it when you use the slang terms anyway, so I'm being really, it's not even a current thing. That's like 15 years ago that my kids were saying that. So anyway, we are talking about Boaz, and you may recall from last week, if you were here, that Ruth had really put herself out there by going to meet Boaz on the threshing floor at night and essentially proposing to him, saying, look, I need rescue, and I think you're the guy to do that for me. Will you marry me sort of scenario. And she just really made herself vulnerable in that context. And I love the way that Boaz responded to her. He was ready to say yes to that. And yet he said, there's just something that I have to do first. I need to go talk to this other guy. And so that is what we're at today. So he sent Ruth home to Naomi, and then he went to meet with this other guy. And that's where we're going to pick up the story today in Ruth chapter 4. And Joe, I'm wondering if we could pull it down just a little bit. Again, still getting a little bit of a ring here this morning. So let's take a look in Ruth chapter 4, starting in verse 1. It says, meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Convenient timing there, right? Like he planned this really well. And Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. This is the first time we've heard about land in this transaction, and it's interesting that he's taking it back to Naomi rather than talking about Ruth, but he's being really strategic in the way he's playing his cards here. So this is how he starts, and he says, I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, oh yeah, there's just one more thing. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. So you're going to be acquiring this property, but it's not really going to be your property. In fact, you're going to be also acquiring a wife, and if she has a kid, this is going to be continuing this other guy's line. And the guy says, at this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. That's what Boaz was going for the whole time, right? It says, now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. Interesting that the author here is already far enough removed from the original context that he's going, there's some things culturally that are happening that I need to explain to you. And so he singles out this detail that didn't really make sense to his audience. Interesting because we have so many other questions about this passage. But anyway, so the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today, you are witnesses. It's all he can do to not just shout it out here. He's so excited about this. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he had relations with her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And for the author, as he's looking at this story, he sees this as being kind of the big reveal that here Ruth is being not only redeemed, but being incorporated into the royal line of King David. So incredible to this author, and yet if he had only known that she's actually also being incorporated into the lineage of Jesus himself. It's such a remarkable story all the way through. But you have to go, this is an interesting chapter to devote so much, it's almost a quarter of the book devoted to this interaction with this other guardian redeemer who doesn't do anything. Like, he doesn't actually come through for Ruth. So there's just sort of this, it's almost like a little side story. And you go, what's that even about? What is in there for us in that? It might heighten the drama of the story a bit to wait to see, is Boaz actually going to be able to do this? But you go, what about for us? It's a little bit of a head scratcher to go, what's the significance here? I went back and looked at my notes from 20 years ago when I preached out of Ruth. I wouldn't bother going back to listen to that podcast. I didn't really think I came up with a good application at the time. And I don't really think it's so much about application. I think really what we find in this story is that it's a picture of the Redeemer at work. We get a little glimmer in Boaz of God going about his redemption business. We see in his character, in his care for the details, and also just his delight and joy in what he's doing. I think that's what comes out of this that is helpful for us as we think about what God has done for us. And the first thing that I think we take away from this is that there's more to redemption than we'll ever even know. There's so much going on. When Ruth asked Boaz to do this for her, she didn't know what that was going to entail, either the cost, the actual financial cost of Boaz doing this, that other guardian redeemer knew. He was calculating and going, yeah, I cannot afford to do this. And Boaz knew he had that worked out. He also knew that there was this guy over here, and so he's working out all the ways to go about it. You know, Karin has a friend, Diane, who says that if you're going to be right, in order to be right, you have to be right three ways. You have to say the right thing, you have to say it at the right time, and you have to say it in the right way. So you can't just be right in what you're saying. You have to really think it all the way through. And I think that is true for Boaz as well. He's having to think through all the ways that he's going to make this. It's not just like a little Las Vegas wedding trip here. He's making sure that this is going to be legitimate and is going to be respected by everybody. He gathers witnesses around to see it happen. He makes sure, even with that sandal thing, that it is legally solid. It is everything about it is fully covered, so there'll be no questioning what he's doing. I think about Scripture saying even about Jesus, when he came for us, that it was at exactly the right time. God had everything planned out to such a degree that we're not even aware of. I one time had a professor draw attention to two verses. One was in Isaiah. He said, it says, God has rolled up his sleeves. All the nations can see his holy, muscled arm. Everyone from one end of the earth to the other sees him at work, doing his salvation work. God investing his full strength in redemption. And he said, compare that to Psalm 8, where it's talking about creation of the world and the universe. And he says, when I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, he said, it's like that's just finger work for God. To create everything there is was not a big exertion for him, but when it comes to salvation, that takes all of God to work that for us. And you think about that because it has to both fully honor God's holiness in the way that he carries this out, and it's also got to fully honor our freedom. He's not going to create a way where he's coercing us to go to him for help, because that's no longer genuine love. He wants it to be authentic relationship. So he's got to have a redemption that is absolutely secure and solid and with the capacity to cover all sin for all time, and yet it's got to be done in just the right way. There's just so much more to redemption than we know. Any thoughts that might spark for you as you just think about the breadth and depth of redemption? Yeah, Becky.
I'm just thinking about sometimes we get frustrated because we want someone to know Jesus and it just doesn't seem like it is the right time. I can see if God has all his muscles working, it has to go for his glory. And if it isn't happening right then his timing isn't right in it.
Yeah, you know, it's hard when our time spans are so much shorter than his, you know, and we can't see with the perspective that he has. But yeah, I think we so often get so frustrated with him that he seems slow. And what's that verse? One of Peter's letters. He's not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. He's being patient and kind with us. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, well, God took a long time with me. I left a church situation, 25 years. All this stuff happened, and God was working the whole time. I didn't know it.
Yes. I mean, that we really don't have to look much further than our own stories, do we, to go, oh, Yeah, God is orchestrating things at a much different pace, and then we can see his hand in it by looking back. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have things in my own life too that I go, wow, God has been baking this for a really long time. I tell people a lot, I'm a slow roast, So yes, Andy.
I think of that analogy that we're looking at the backside of the canvas with all the strings and the
Yes.
and the knots, and it just looks like
A mess.
It doesn't make any sense, and there will be a day will it be turned around.
Yes.
This glorious, beautiful tapestry.
Yes.
That we couldn't have imagined.
Yeah. Makes me think of Job saying, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And even though my skin is peeled off me, and I'm going to see him in my flesh, and I'm going to see it with my own eyes, not with somebody else's eyes. We are going to get to see that someday. Yeah. Yeah, Jan?
Yeah, there's a theme here of trust.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that is really, really true. It's and it gets back to Ruth again, the trust she had to place in Boaz as he goes to do all this, that he's actually going to do what he said. The other thing that we see in this is not only is there more to redemption than we'll ever know, but the other Redeemer isn't one. When he goes to talk to this guy, and the guy's response is, I cannot do it. Well, you can't be a Redeemer if you can't redeem. So he's not actually a Redeemer. He doesn't have it in him. And so this, and I think Boaz knew that this would be the guy's response as he goes to him. And so he's not a threat to Boaz in that sense as he's interacting with him. And I was thinking about this in terms of our own redemption in Christ, and was thinking about God's law as really kind of this alternate Redeemer for us that isn't one. That God laid out this plan of what it would take to do his will, and it was possible, I suppose, technically, for somebody to do everything on that list, and yet that law couldn't actually change your heart and take out the things that wanted to do something else. There's something Paul talks about, how there's something about the law that as soon as there's something that's forbidden out there, then that's exactly the thing we want to do, right? It's like that law generates something inside us that there's that evilness that the law can't address. It's not possible. And Romans 8:3 even addresses that. It says, for what the law was powerless to do, this law it's incapable of saving us because it was weakened by the flesh. God did by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so this other potential Redeemer isn't one, but I was thinking about that and thinking about just in terms of our cultural context to even think about this phrasing and go, is there really only one Redeemer? Can we even say that in our world today? We live in a time and a place that highly values the equality of all beliefs, right? You're fine. It's fine for you to believe whatever you believe. You just can't believe that it in some way is superior or negating somebody else's belief, right? That's a very high value in our culture. Quote from Oprah is always useful. She once said, there are millions of ways to be a human being and many paths to what you call God. There couldn't possibly be just one way. Now, in fairness to Oprah, this was said in 2007. I don't know what her theology is today. So she may think something totally other. But I think this quote is useful because it really does represent, I think, how a lot of people think. Like, how could you possibly think there was only one Redeemer when there are so many other belief systems out there? It feels wrong somehow for us to suggest that. One of my favorite authors, Leslie Newbegin, wrote a book called The Gospel in a Pluralist Society, because that's what we're talking about here. We are a society that not only has a plurality of beliefs, but also really values there being lots of beliefs, doesn't want to have just one. And he said this, he said, in a pluralist society such as ours, any confident statement of ultimate belief, any claim to announce the truth about God and his purpose for the world is liable to be dismissed as ignorant, arrogant, and dogmatic, right? That's how people perceive those kinds of comments. But then he says this, he said, we have no reason to be frightened of this accusation. And I love that, because so often the way we as Christians react to that sort of attitude is with fear, is with defensiveness, is with hostility, is with this pushback and close ranks, put up the walls, all those kinds of things. And he says we don't have to do that. And I think part of the reason why we don't have to do that is because it's really not quite the right way to frame up this whole conversation to begin with. So let's put up a little diagram here. So let's say here's all, that's not even all the different belief systems. It's just a representation there of all the different religions, if you will, out there in the world, and God's throne being that picture in the middle. You think of that being, God up on his mountain, and the concept is everybody says, well, all these different paths will lead you to God, right? That's the kind of sentiment around that. And so, therefore, if all of these different groups are trying to lay out a way to God, it feels very arrogant to single out our one little path and say, yeah, this is the right one, because you go, well, there's millions of other choices. How can you be so bold as to say yours is the only one? I feel like this is actually a misrepresentation of how to think about this, because in reality, what we're looking at here are any of these paths that are religious systems toward God. They all are in some ways on equal footing. Even if you were saying Christian behavior is going to get you to God, it's not. And I think really all of these paths, none of them actually make it up the mountain, right? There's none who's righteous, no, not one. And so I think it's an underestimation of how big the problem is, and an overestimation of what any of these paths could do to reach God. Martin Luther once said, this attitude springs from a false conception of sin, the concept that sin is a small matter easily taken care of by good works. Because really, ultimately, all of these paths, and you could even include a Christian behavior path, can give you this sense that you're somehow building that connection with God, and none of those paths actually work. When we're talking about a Redeemer, instead we're saying that it goes the other way. So Psalm 49 says, no one can redeem the life of another or give God a ransom for them. The redemption of a soul is costly. No payment is ever enough. We can't do it. And that's because instead of this being the picture, it should really look like this, that Christ's redemption that Scripture said is once for all, happened. It's God's activity coming our direction, and God comes to all people and says, whosoever will may come. And so it's not that which path to God is the right one. It's about God. And so redemption is done for us, not by us. Right? So it's not about who's got the right path. Does that Does that make sense? Any comments on that? Yeah, it's not about strategizing. In fact, the question then isn't is my path the right one, and can I prove it? Can I show that my path is better than your path? Instead, the question is, who loves me, and can I receive it? Because that sort of takes, this bigger religion. And that's not to say that all religions are equal, because some do have more of the truth than others. Some convey some real beauty, and others are full of evil. And so that's not to equate them, but it's to say that's not really the issue. The issue is back to Christ, and who am I in relationship to him? Ajith Fernando is an author and an evangelist in Sri Lanka, and he's friends with Jerry and Lisa So, and he actually came to Federal Way to visit them at one point, and I got to have dinner with them, and he made a really interesting comment, because in his work he deals with a lot of people from a lot of different faith backgrounds, especially there in Sri Lanka, and he said, you would think that people who are most committed to their other religion are the ones who would be most anti a message from Christ, or the Christian message. And he said, and actually it's the opposite. He said the people who are most devoted to these different faiths, they're the ones that Christ is coming to and meeting in their dreams, in different ways. He's calling them to himself. And you go, that totally lines up with Jesus' message that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will be filled, because if somebody is seeking God and they're in a system that isn't leading them to Christ, Christ can still meet them in that, right? Christ can use anything, and he can meet us in wherever our hunger is. And so I feel like that is really just good to keep in mind when sometimes we may feel threatened by the changing culture around us. When we see, if you make a claim that America was more Christian at one point and now it's not, and it bothers you, you go, it doesn't change the fact of what Christ has done and his capacity to still reach people. And he's reaching people. We can be lulled into a false sense of what that even means to say that. Now I'm kind of rambling. But anyway, all that to say, we don't need to feel threatened by the presence of other faiths, because it's still the same Jesus, and always will be. Any comments?
I just keep thinking how simple Revelation is saying, like, the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Like, there's no, you got to get a doctrinal statement.
Yes.
You have to be analyzed and, hermeneuticized, or that's not even a word, but it's the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony to it.
Yeah.
Do we believe? Who loves me, and can I receive it?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
really simple and beautiful. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Laura.
Jesus is the one who said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father. It's not something that we are generating out of ourselves.
Yes.
And then along with that, he's also the one who said, if anyone is thirsty, let him come. So he's not pushing anybody away.
Yes. No, I think that is really good. Yes, he is the one who gets to be the way, and not have us coming up with a way. Yeah. One of the things, the word redeem is actually one of my favorite words in English, in part because, you always hear that the meaning of that is to buy back something, and that is definitely true. But I like it in the English because I think about, the original word deem means to judge the worth of something. I didn't deem this show worthy of watching, or like it's almost sometimes given with a negative connotation to it, but it's an evaluation kind of word. And to redeem something is to assign new worth to it. And I think about that in the context of buying back, like Christ bought us with his redemption, and thinking about buying a work of art, and you go, what determines the value of a work of art? It's really determined by what the buyer is willing to pay for it, right? That then, if some buyer sees a new artist and pays a lot of money for this painting, redeemed as from this point forward has a new value assigned to it. It's been redeemed as worth more. And I think when we look at Matthew 13, Jesus' parable, he says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, and when a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, he went and sold all he had and bought that field. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. When he found one very precious pearl, he went away and sold all he had and bought it. He bought a single pearl. I've always heard these parables in terms of how I'm supposed to value the kingdom and see it as being worth so much. And that is, I'm sure, part of it, but also just going, this is Jesus saying, look, this is how much I value you. You are the kingdom, that the kingdom is made of such as these, as we are. And he's saying, I'm giving everything for you, for that single pearl that you are. And I think that the scale of the redemption shows a scale of his love, and he was willing to give absolutely everything for you and for me. And you go, what an awesome thing to go. This is our redeemed value. It's the blood of Christ himself. Like that is how much you are loved, that God would give his own life for you. That's staggering to think about. Karin teaches professional development courses to a lot of different municipalities, and she was doing one for City of Puyallup Parks and Rec Department. And there's this one employee in the department who everybody loved. His name was Roki, and he was a landscaper and did maintenance work, but mostly this landscape work, and he was so committed to his job. He was fully on. He loved his job, and people loved working with him. And he, even when he wasn't at work, he could be found picking things up and cleaning up the world. And his manager asked him one time, he's like, Roki, why are you the way you are? And without hesitation, he responded and said, this city is my house. This city is my house. I think about us as being Christ's city. We're his home. We're his dwelling place. You are his home, his dwelling place. And you go, Jesus, why would you do all this for us? It's because we're his house. And I say that to not only remind you of your own value, but also to have you think about this city that we are in and go, this is Christ's city. It's his house. Who are the people in it who are needing to know about his redemption and his love? And can we not be afraid and intimidated by people who have different beliefs, who have different understandings of God, and instead go, that doesn't matter what matters. Can they hear it and loves them? Can they receive it? Can they have they heard it? Can they hear it? And can we be part of God's redemptive work? It's so, this story in Ruth, I just feel like is so full of joy. I hope you can just hear through Boaz God's absolute delight in you this morning. Let's pray. God, I'm so grateful for this little book that has so many pictures of your faithfulness and your kindness to us again and again, and your deep love, your desire not only to do this thing for us, but also to have the whole world see and know about it. And just like the people said to Boaz, God, I pray that you would be famous for what you've done for us, that we would be part of making your name known, your reputation great for this amazing thing that you've done in buying us back. We love you and are grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.